Have you ever had a conversation with someone and felt like they weren't listening? Like maybe they didn't even care about what you had to say? Not so long ago, life was a bit like that for women in Canada. They weren't allowed to vote. And if they spoke out and voiced their opinions, they could even be sent to jail. It was a time when women had more fear and less freedom, more rules and fewer rights. But 5 courageous Albertan women came together and changed it all. How, you might ask? Over a cup of tea. That's right, a cup of tea. But more on that in a minute. Almost 100 years ago, Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Nellie McClung, Louise McKinney, and Henrietta Muir Edwards were fed up with the way things were. Emily Murphy was the first female magistrate in Canada and wanted to be appointed to the Senate. But since she was a woman, she wasn't eligible. The law at the time said it was a position for persons, a word which somehow didn't include women. The women who would become known as the Famous Five set out to change that. But since women were strongly discouraged from getting together and talking about politics, the Famous Five set up what they called pink teas. The name was a great disguise. People assumed that they were just having dainty tea parties, but in reality, they were planning their strategy to move forward gender equality in Canada. All the planning and work that occurred during the pink teas led to the Famous Five's first petition to the Supreme Court of Canada. It was not to be that easy. Their petition was rejected. But they weren't giving up. They decided to approach the highest possible court authority at the time, the Privy Council of England. And on October 18, 1929, an amazing thing happened. The Famous Five's petition led to the ruling that women were included as persons under law. These 5 courageous women changed the course of history in Canada and the Commonwealth and paved the way for women to be considered equal in all aspects of life. Generations later, their actions continue to inspire Canadian women to be ambitious, adventurous, and famous. Today, the Famous Five Foundation works to create a society where every voice is heard, valued, and has the power to challenge and conquer injustice.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining us on this A Famous Five Friday, a day when women have more power, see more opportunities, and hopefully seize those opportunities. I'm so thrilled that today we're going to meet a real 2 nation builders, one who is actually overseeing the project and built a national project, and someone who is knowledgeable and training others how to build national projects. One of the special things that's happened with the leadership of Dawn Farrell of Trans Mountain Corporation is that she has also paid attention to environmental and cultural concerns as the pipeline was built, because she too realizes that we are all treaty people. And some of our greatest leaders have been female Indigenous leaders, both in the past and of course today. And so while we figure out how best to live together based on our history, we can all dream of a much more inclusive, diverse, prosperous, and peaceful Canada. And so now it is my great pleasure to turn the virtual pink tea over to excellent role models for us, to the CEO of Trans Mountain Pipeline, Dawn Farrell, and to her host today, our host today, to Dr. Kim Jones of McMaster University. Thank you two very, very much for doing this, and over to you.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. I'm really looking forward to being able to get to know Dawn a little bit better through this pink tea experience. So I'm a prof at McMaster in engineering, but I'm also the chair of the Ontario Network of Women in Engineering, where we try and inspire more young women and gender diverse folks to consider engineering as a profession. And we really rely on role models like Dawn to make people see different areas and spaces as more welcoming. So Dawn, I first want to recognize that you're a leader in a typically male-dominated field, and I'd like to spend some time exploring that before diving into some of the interesting parts about how to make a huge and complex project work. But I think it would be really interesting for many folks to know a little bit more about your career trajectory. How did you get to this place?
Well, it was a long career. So I'm 39 years in business, which feels like yesterday. As
I
you
thought you were going to say you were 39 years old.
I wish,
Right.
Zoom does a lot for you, actually. So we all have to take what we can. Long career, but I just like all kids in Alberta, I started out working when I was like 12 or 13, and I started in my grandmother's dress store, and then catapulted through my father's apiary. My father was a beekeeper, to university, and then finally to TransAlta, where I started out as a forecast analyst. I was an economist. And, I'm the beneficiary of a fantastic education system here in Canada, where you can be born into a family that's trying to get going into a trailer in a trailer court, and you can end up with a master's degree 25 years later and start a career in downtown Calgary. So, I just was so excited to have the opportunity to be curious and to learn. So I went through, I did a lot of different jobs at TransAlta. I was very lucky to have strong mentors and leaders, and I was a hard worker. Like, I love to work. So that was probably, if I couldn't figure it out, I could outwork everybody. And that was sort of that's what people know me for. In about 2003, my husband and I moved to Vancouver, and I worked for BC Hydro. And that was my first operations job. And for your young women in engineering, getting into the field, getting into the operations, getting into the plants, learning the maintenance systems, building big projects. I had done that in the late 90s in the independent power business, but getting to be an operational leader was probably the big break for me. Because if I had not done that, I would have never been attracted back to TransAlta, where I eventually became the chief operating officer and the CEO. So it was a combination of business development, commercial economics, but also operations. And frankly, I might even be able to pass an engineering course or two, because I had to learn a lot about engineering to be a good business person in infrastructure. And then of course I retired, was brought back to finish Trans Mountain. And just as a correction, I retired again on September 1st. And I now am the chair of the board of Trans Mountain, and we appointed a new CEO, which I mentored. He was from the organization, and I had a real desire to make sure that I would pass the baton to an internal candidate. So while we were building the pipeline, I was getting a few people ready to be leaders as well.
Congratulations on your re-retirement.
Yes, although it's not feeling like that, but it will at some point.
So we have the privilege of having a couple of guests ask questions as well. And I know a young woman, her name's DeAndre, and she had a particular question where she was curious about some of the early stages of your career. So we'll pass it over to DeAndre.
My name is DeAndre Wilson Ihijirika, and I'm a PhD candidate with the Institute for Studies in Transdisciplinary Engineering Education and Practice, also called ISTEP. My PhD research is attempting to understand how student experiences influence career pathways for underrepresented groups in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. I also work as the Executive Director of Work Integrated Learning at Calgary Economic Development, leading an initiative known as TalentEd YYC, focused on working with businesses to create more opportunities for students to engage in internships, capstone projects, and other forms of work integrated learning. My background is in chemical engineering, and prior to my PhD studies, I worked for many years in the oil and gas industry as a professional engineer. So thank you, Dawn, for being a role model for women in this space. My question for you relates to my current work and research. As a graduate of the University of Calgary, what role do you feel work integrated learning opportunities like internships and capstone projects played in your career trajectory, especially as a woman in a male-dominated field?
Okay, so we never had work integrated learning when I was starting out. So when I started out, you got into a department and then you just had to work like crazy. And I was lucky enough to work for some very interesting men that were well before their time, and they were pretty smart about taking talented women in the organization and really protecting them, because if it hadn't have been for them, I would have been pushed out of the herd like really quite early in my career, because I came from my father was very domineering and very argumentative, and he taught me how to be very domineering and argumentative. And so I didn't have that sense to back down. I never backed down from anybody. And I would have been wiped out in the herd if it hadn't have been for him. So it's a very, very different time for you. And look at you, your talent level and the work that you've done at your age is far beyond anything I ever did. So when you're here today looking at me, just know you can go far beyond anything that I ever did with what you've got and where you are. In terms of, though, when it comes to women and work integrated learning, I really impress upon you to work, and I'll help you with this because you're here in Calgary. But we need to make sure that all of the women that you're placing in the engineering groups are placed first in the field. I don't want them in offices. I don't want them working on strategies or writing papers or working on sustainability, all the things that people think are really interesting and important today are interesting and important, and they will be in your career, but you've got that. What you need to do is get out in the field, and you need to work with frontline people that turn the wrenches. You need to make sure the maintenance systems work. You need to make sure that you understand the equipment, the machinery, what the practical realities are of running any business. I'm also the chair of a chemical company called Chemours. I'm going to their plants next month. I won't find a single woman in those plants. It'll be really hard to find one. And my view is, and it was true for me until I got operating experience in 2003, which was almost 20 years after I started, I was not ever taken seriously by any male in any part of the business. I was the token nice, they actually called me the blue-eyed, blonde-haired pet of the CEO. I got to wear some of that. And I'm a really tough woman. So if they were giving me that handle in the late 90s, it just kind of shows you what I'm talking about. So for me, on the work integrated learning, go operations, engineering, construction, get out in the field, do 5 to 7 years of that. And then we'll help you hone your other skills to be able to go into management. Just one other point, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long, but I have so much to say about these issues. Nobody teaches the young women or the young men in their early 30s anymore, Kim, how to manage, like simple leadership, simple management, simple leadership skills. So we have to do something about that, because I for some reason, post-COVID, companies have really lost their mojo when it comes to training young people. The MBAs are too high level and too theoretical to teach the kind of skills that the women need. So it's a combination of getting them into the field, teaching them leadership skills, and then teaching them the other leadership skills you need to navigate through the corporate offices. And that combination, if we can get it into the women by the time they're 35, they can do a lot. They can do a lot with that, but they cannot compete with the men unless they have the hard science behind them.
Yeah, you said something really interesting about, being tough and being assertive and standing up for yourself. And I know, like, in some of those spaces, it can be the only way to get your voice heard. But sometimes women can get penalized for being too assertive because it's not what people expect. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious how you've navigated that.
I would say it's not sometimes, I'd say it's always. Women are always penalized for being overly assertive. I think the way that I learned to overcome that is I'm assertive, but I'm also very respectful of the other person, no matter who it is. So it's clear that I'm asserting my perspective, but I also want to hear yours. It's clear that I'm interested in you as a person. All the men that I work with in Calgary, I know their wives' names, I know what their kids do, and I'm actually interested in that. I'm not just doing it because it's a cool thing to do. I'm really interested in people, and I'm interested in them as people. And I help a lot of men get on boards because they're now being discriminated against. And, you know, there's this sort of, oh, it's okay for them to be discriminated against because we need to get our chance. And I'm going, no, it's actually not okay for anybody to be discriminated against. Everybody has value. Everybody has to be listened to. So I just found that I learned over time, it took me a long time to learn it, to be an extraordinary listener, to pay attention. I loved in your video where at the very beginning, the person was talking and the other person walked away. I go wild when that happens. I make people come back, put their phones down and look at me and talk to me because I deserve respect and they deserve respect. But that is the way, I think, to overcome that bias that you cannot in business be quiet, sit quietly, you know, be manipulative with men, you know, use different kinds of methodologies that women learned how to use for years to get their own way. You have to be business oriented, assertive, you have to have opinions, you have to be able to state them, but you also need to listen to them and you need to draw people into you so that they want to be in dialogue and in conversation and more importantly, in relationship with you.
Yeah, I've seen another thing happen where women don't feel like they're ambitious. Some women, I should say, don't feel like they're ambitious to take on leadership roles because they view that leadership is just about being pushy and it's not so much about it. So, you know, what are things that you might share that are the exciting, non-traditional things that make you a good leader?
Well, I've said this before and I still stand by it. I'm not the greatest leader. You know, I don't always have all the right
So
answers.
humility.
Yeah, I don't always have all the right answers and I don't always do all the right things at the right time, but I do know when I've made a mistake and I do know how to apologize and I know how to reset. And I am pushy because I do believe fundamentally we are not getting things done in our society because leaders have stopped pushing. And I think what I mean by pushing is you have to have a clear view of where we need to get things by the end of the day, by the end of the week, by the end of the month, by the end of the year, by the end of 3 years. And we would have never gotten that pipeline finished if I wasn't pushy in that I had a sense of how we had to march through everything that we needed to do day by day, month by month, year by year. But you have to be pretty creative about what it takes to get things done. Because nowadays it's not always a clear, straight path. You don't just write a memo and suddenly everybody agrees with you. If you're, for example, trying to get an additional $10 billion for a pipeline that is over budget, you have to be pretty smart about how you navigate through various decision makers, how you explain the issues, how you understand the issues, so that you can bring people to the party and get them to agree because it's the right thing to do. That isn't just pointing at a direction and saying, go over there and do it just because I said so. It's figuring out what direction you're trying to get everybody to, figuring out what everybody needs in their positions in order to make their decisions, getting them what they need, and then moving them to the right spot. So I often use the idea of journey. We're on a journey. We got to get to that next island. Who's doing what to get us to the next island? But we are going somewhere. And it isn't, and I'm very impatient. I don't like dialogue, conversation for the sake of conversation, rooms full of people having discussions with one another. Work to me is get the work done because I have a big ambition around what women need to do at home and they don't have time. They have to be moving the ball at work so they can get home and move the ball at home, right?
And men too.
And men too.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of sort of being pushed into leadership positions, I read that you actually had to be pushed to be CEO of Trans Mountain, and that Chrystia Freeland, the Minister of Finance, actually gave you a little bit of a nudge to take on that role. So, I mean, obviously, without the famous five. That's a direct benefit that has politicians in those roles. But I mean, first of all, I'm curious how you got to know Chrystia Freeland.
Well, that's not really a true story. I mean,
Okay, that was in the
there's lots
glove.
of there's
They
lots of
probably
stories.
abbreviated.
For sure. The government reached out and asked me if I'd throw my name in the hat, and for sure, for me, when I was considering it, it had to be a decision that came from the board, because I had to work for the board, not for the government. And so it was really a long conversation with Bill Down, who was the ex-CEO of BMO, that convinced me that I'd have a good partner at the board to work with. And then, of course, I still had to make it, I still had to have the board, the committee decide that they wanted to ask me to go. But she did encourage me to take it on. And I really didn't know her that well. Chrystia knows a lot of people. I think I'd been on a couple of conference calls with her when she was doing the free trade agreement. So I was known to her. I think what I was known for, though, by both the federal government and the provincial government, is that I'm a very straight shooter, and I just tell it like it is, and I don't play games with people. So I don't tell a liberal one thing and a conservative another, and the premier one thing and the prime minister another thing. I had to work on some policy for TransAlta. I needed everybody's help in order to do the policy and save the company. And so I was kind of known to the government as someone who they could rely on to just be very straightforward and clear. And I think that's how that came about.
Yeah, so I mean, building a reputation and a brand is clearly important, but I think also, I mean, you talked about the power of relationships, and people are sometimes reluctant to network, but so much of anybody's success depends on their network. So do you have any tips for people to do a good job of that?
Yeah, so in my day, we didn't think about our brand, and we didn't even talk about it, and it wasn't part of who we were. And I would never recommend that to anybody today. And we didn't network for the sake of networking. How I probably got my reputation is I worked on a lot of things. I worked in the community, I worked at work, I worked at home, I worked on a lot of things, and I did a lot of hard work. And I worked with a lot of people. And what I say to my granddaughter, she's in high school and my other granddaughter's in junior high, and it's such a mess, right? Still the same as it was in the 70s. And what I said to her is, I think my secret sauce was every place I went, everything I did, I made relationships because I worked with people. And then I kept those relationships. I just keep the people. And I just continue to reach out, and I continue to be interested in who they are. And I think that's really how you build a network of a lot of people over a long period of time. And most people I know are the opposite. They're there for you if they need you. And then if they don't need you, they're gone. And then when they phone you again the next time, they need you, and then they're gone. And I'm phoning you when I don't need you, because I'm actually interested in who you are, because I actually care about who you are. So I think if you're in this to get ahead and to make money and to be popular and to be on YouTube, you're not in my camp. If you're in this if you want to lead because you truly want to serve, you want to make Canada a better place, you want to make Alberta a better place, you want to make the oil industry a better place, you want to make it a better place for women and women leaders, then you're different in your approach. And your approach is always about people. It's always about how you see people. And don't get me wrong, I've made lots of enemies. I have broken relationships. I'm not perfect by any stretch. So even when you set out to have strong relationships, you can blow it. It's really hard. But I think if you go there, instead of, I'm going to network with you because you're Dawn Farrell and you're going to do stuff for me, you're going to give me something. It's so fake, right? Nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, I think people feel like they should be doing transactional networking, and everybody sees through it. There are very few people who feel like that's genuine and respond to it. And that's been my experience as well. But certainly I've benefited from the relationships that I've built, but those relationships weren't built because I wanted anything from people. They were built because I really cared about them. And
Right.
that's where you get those benefits both ways. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think if you're that kind of person and you have to reach out to somebody you don't know, which I do all the time. I reach out to people I've never met before, and I get their names through other people because I need them to do something for me. They know that I'm asking them in a respectful way, and that I need them to be part of something that's bigger than all of us. And they come through for me, and then I always come through for everybody else. So if somebody calls me and says, you know, will you do this for me, or will you call this person, or will you introduce me, I do it. And so you have to give, right? It's always the same.
Yeah. And you usually get from giving too. But you're also in a leadership role, which many women aren't. You're in an environment that many women avoid, and that isn't really perceived as like a caring career or a place where you feel like you can improve it. And you already spoke to this, like you talked about being almost a servant leader, like someone who's there because they want to give back. So, you know, leading a huge pipeline project doesn't look like it fulfills those values. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about how you see that it does.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean, how it doesn't fulfill those values.
Well, yeah,
pi-
no, I mean, I think on the surface, people might perceive that it's a large industrialized project. It's not about people.
Okay, well, let's talk about
Yeah,
that.
so I
Is
think
that-
I want to give you the
yeah,
chance to talk
yeah,
about it.
that large project employed at the height 15,000 people, 34,000 through the project. It cost $34 billion and created about $55 billion of economic value in its construction to all sorts of tradespeople and families and restaurant owners and hotel owners, who all absolutely benefited by the construction. And then because it was built, it's taken the resource that Canadians have, our oil, and it's increased the value of 4.5 million barrels by about $10 each a barrel, because we now have an alternative trade route. And that increase in value gets reinvested here in Alberta and Canada. It's turned into about $8 billion of royalties and taxes for the federal and the provincial government. So that's 8 hospitals a year as a result of that, which is a whole bunch of people working in hospitals and a whole bunch of people being taken care of. And we all know we need those. It creates about $27 billion worth of reinvestment value in the Alberta economy, which creates jobs for our young engineers, which we need to get them into jobs. And when we sell it, Canadians will get all their money back. So now it's already created all this economic value. Plus, every Canadian, and I'm going to get this. I'm not going to swear to this math. I'm going to get it double checked. But you own a $34 billion pipeline, which is about $850 a person in equity value. And my job as chair is to get you all that money back plus a return, because you invested in it. We basically use the credit rating of the Canadian government to build it, but you own it. This is your pipeline. So the people of Canada own it. So when I look at all of those people there, I look at the young people I worked with at Trans Mountain. And, you know, frankly, my team at Trans Mountain were these white guys that everybody talks about. These are the most fantastic, giving people that I've ever worked with. They worked tirelessly day after day after day. They taught lots of young people how to do work. Yeah, there was, sometimes they were a little bit like my dad and my husband can be, where you want to go over and hit them over the head because they're being a little snarky. But most of the time they weren't. And I would say any woman on this feed would be privileged to work with them. They were just a great group of guys. So I think we carry around these stereotypes. I've never met an actual millennial that I've read about. I've never really met one of these old cranky guys that I've read about. I've worked with hundreds of men and women, and we're all cranky in our own way, but we got to get stuff done. So I would encourage women to stop with those stereotypes. There's a lot of care in giving all those people jobs and building something that makes Canada richer. The first economics will come through our third quarter GDP of this pipeline. GDP is important for this country. If we're in a recession right now, and increasing GDP per capita is the way out. So I don't have any sense that what I was doing wasn't caring. I guess the other thing is the way we did that pipeline, we did the biggest archaeological dig in Canada. We had 350 sites where we took where we made sure that we took care of all the archaeology that was there with the First Nations in BC. We now have a record back about 2,000 years in terms of what it looked like to be in the Lower Mainland. We monitored 27,000 birds' nests. We moved 1.5 million fish and salamanders that were not killed while we were making a highway. We went under the highway. We went under the rivers. We did a lot of work to make sure that we took care of the environment the whole way through. So all of the values of Canadians were in that pipeline, and that employed biologists, archaeologists, surveyors. It employed all sorts of people that you guys are educating. So the people were a big part of that pipeline.
Yeah, and I mean, on that note, I think that's really fascinating, especially the archaeology bit. It was really important, I think, for the success of the pipeline to build relationships with community, with Indigenous communities, you know, make sure that your local folks were on board. You know, did you find that, you know, there was anything particularly important about your leadership style that was helpful in navigating those spaces?
No, not at all, because that was all done before me, and it was done by an old white guy. So Ian Anderson, who started the project in 2012, worked tirelessly day in and day out with all 69 First Nations and wrote MBAs with them, had all the agreements in place with all the leaders. And basically he carried all that water so that I could come in after he retired and finish the pipeline. And, you know, I did do some work with First Nations in British Columbia, but the bulk of it, 99% of it, was already done by Ian before I ever got there, and he did a fantastic job of it.
But I also heard that you had to, you know, in some cases go through people's backyards and navigate urban areas. And, you know, I taught a problem solving and technical communication course to engineers, and sometimes engineers weren't always excited about things that don't involve calculations. So,
Yeah.
you know, can you talk a little bit about, you know, how important it is for a technical project to really think of, and technical problem solving to really think about how interlinked the community and the politics and the communication is?
Yeah, so let me give you an example of that. It's really helpful for your engineers. So my chief engineer, who was the head of my project, was a gold-winning engineer from U of A, probably in same time I went to school, 1985, Corey Goulet, and he's one of the top engineers for building pipelines around the world. And there's an owl sanctuary in BC, and it has owls in captivity that you know, there's like 6 or 7 of them, and there's pairs of them, and it just takes everything to keep these spotted owls alive, right? Because they're endangered. And he went out to the field. We were going to put a trench in front of the it's a 1 kilometer pipeline in front of this owl sanctuary. Corey went out and walked the land, and he went, "Oh my God, there's no way we can have construction trucks and build just use a trenching method." And he decided to put a 1 kilometer, about 1.4 kilometer directional drill under the land so that you could start on one side and end on the other. And he put sound barriers up, and they did everything they possibly could so that when we were putting the pipeline under the ground in front of the owl sanctuary, it wouldn't cause noise and disruption to those owls. Now, it took him, now in the end, there was a bunch of ruckus as we were going through it, but at the end, it was him having the foresight to know that that was the right thing to do. And it costs, as you know, an underground directional drill is way more expensive than trenching a hole. So we spent the money on his recommendation. And then his whole team of engineers that had to do that directional drill had to actually get the drill through some not very easy land to get through, because it's not always, you can't always do that. So they spent tons of time doing the engineering on that, and then the construction guys ran into all sorts of problems. So they spent all sorts of time problem solving, and all of that was for those spotted owls. So that's just one small, tiny example. I mean, we did that. We had 1,100-kilometer pipeline. There was, I say to people, it's like building 100-meter civil projects one at a time to get 1,100 kilometers built, because everything across those mountains looks like that. And there's lots of environmental and First Nations and people considerations as you do it. So the engineers absolutely cannot just do their calculations. They really have to be problem solvers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One of the things you said as an engineer, it's fascinating. So I have to ask, you were, as Trans Mountain was probably solving problems that had never been solved before. So like, what would you say were your biggest technical developments in order to do what you did?
Well, there was a lot. Next year you should have Corey on this, and he can tell you, like, we had 28 technically challenged areas in an 87-kilometer range just in going through Hope, right? That was just one example. We had another one where we were going through a very sacred part of a First Nations group where we had to do some micro tunneling. We had 4 micro tunnels. Oh my gosh. And one of them, we couldn't get it through. So we had to end up pulling it out, working a deal and doing a trench. And it was like, I thought when you looked at a piece of ground, that it was just a piece of ground. Apparently every piece of ground is different everywhere. So, we learned all of that. Perhaps the one that was the most exciting is we had to go 2.5 kilometers through Mountain 3, which is just outside of Hope, through the middle of the mountain, do a directional drill through some of the hardest granite that there is. It took 655 days. If we had known it was going to take 655, we would have done just a regular blast tunnel. When we were going through it, you ream through like a drill, if you were drilling a tooth, you have different drill sizes and you ream through. There were 3 rivers in that mountain that were filling up that hole with water. So we had to change. We were going to put a 36-inch pipe through. We decided to go 30. We had to get regulatory approval. We lost the regulatory approval. We went back in, got it again, got the pipe halfway through, finally got stuck, had to pull it out, had to do some more drilling. It was, all I would do is get on the phone with the guys and go, okay, don't rush. Take your time. You guys all know how to do the calculations. Figure it out. I'll just keep everybody way over the board, the government, everybody else will be over here. And, when they got the pipe stuck, we were closing in on the end, and it was costing us $200 million a month in interest payments to not be finished, right? So like everybody's under a lot of pressure. To the shareholder, who's the government, just said, okay, just finish. If we blew it and that hole got filled up with water and we couldn't use it, it was a 2-year delay, and we'd had to go around the mountain. So it was really high stakes engineering that was going on there. But in the end, the guys pulled out the pipe, just drilled a little bit more, showed us on the screen how it was all going to work, got it through. And the most important thing is, while they were doing that, they did a whole bunch of other work on the commissioning, so that we effectively only had a month delay of something that should have probably been 2 or 3 months of a delay. And just, again, it was engineering, working with construction, working with management. And I guess what I learned, Kim, on this project was, when there's big things to do and it's important and people are working on it, and everybody worked at Trans Mountain because there was this big purpose to it. It was this nation building project. And, we just solved problems every day, every single day. And so that made it really quite exceptional and quite interesting. You would, as an engineer, you would have loved it. You'd have loved every day.
Absolutely. I think engineers all get excited about there's a problem to solve. That's very exciting.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, one of the things that the project, I would say nationally, was well known for was being very over budget, even before you started.
Yeah.
And I think some of the things you talked about around the unexpected pieces led to that. How do you budget something that's so unknown?
You don't. I mean, I concluded when I got there, you know, the initial thing is you go, oh my God, they must be just standing on shovels wasting time. That's how could it, you know, how could something that was supposed to cost, I think the last budget had been started at 6 billion in 2010, and then it went to 11, and then 18, and then it was 21 by February of 2022. And it ended at 34, right? And when I got there, I did a deep dive and I thought we could do it for about 32. And it cost 34. So I was out by 2 billion. And I can tell you exactly why I was out, because we, again, even then there were things that we didn't know that we needed to factor in. This project was hampered by, it lost its regulatory approval for a year, so it couldn't get going. They had that atmospheric flood in BC right on the route. That was a 6-month delay in terms of construction season. We didn't understand there was changing bird regulations that caused a lot of work stoppages that frankly the federal government helped us figure out how we could do that well, so that the next year we didn't have that problem. And then we had forest fires, so we had days where we could only put people in the field for half a day. Well, when you got 15,000 people in the mountains building a pipeline and they can only work from 5 in the morning till 11, that's a big productivity loss, right? And we had COVID. Like you couldn't, when we put in our application to the regulator, it's just like you can't write this stuff, the number of things that happened. But most importantly, what really made it hard is there was no way to estimate the way in which you had to account for 150 conditions, 69 agencies, 1,500 other smaller conditions, the work with the First Nations, like everything was detail. There's no way you could have estimated that project. And there's no private sector company that could have ever built it, because they couldn't have withstood the economic consequence. What's interesting to me is now that it's built, I kept thinking, how on earth are we ever going to make our money back? But the toll was set up so that the oil companies pay the bulk of it. So the project, it's an economic company after it's finished, which is actually quite remarkable, because a lot of infrastructure gets built and you're never quite sure if it gets its payback. So this piece of infrastructure has.
There are all kinds of interesting technical pieces around project and program management. But another technical piece has to do with the IT piece. And so we had another guest, Shailene, who had a really interesting question, and I will pass it over to her.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shailene Yaskowicz-Doig. I'm a cybersecurity sales professional at Trellix, and my interests and responsibilities beyond supporting my clients are to further support women in leadership and technology. And Dawn, I've watched a number of your interviews, and I was inspired by how much you take to heart the responsibility of leadership. My question for you today is related to technology and security, which is key to your role at Trans Mountain. With the increase of cyber threats targeting critical infrastructure, I was just wondering, how is Trans Mountain protecting sensitive operational technology to ensure pipeline safety? I wanted to thank you, Dawn, for being open to us asking questions and providing a line of sight into the things that are truly important to you as a leader. Wishing you all the best. Thanks so much.
Well, first of all, I'm not going to tell you because I'm on a cyber link, and I don't really want to tell all the cyber people how we're protecting against them. But what I am going to say is it is a very, very big project at Trans Mountain. There's a number of elements of capital that we've spent to protect the system overall. But I would say the most important contribution that I've made, that Mark will continue on in his role as CEO, is bringing together, and this will be music to your ears, the IT people with the operations people so that they together really understand what they've got to do to be able to protect the information and then be able to recover in the event that there is a cyber attack. So we do fundamentally believe that, you know, we're not special, we will be attacked. And there's lots of proactive work we do with our staff to try to stop them from, you know, doing things like phishing. When I have a habit as a CEO, as I run my own red team exercises. So I hire firms using a lawyer and our internal audit, and I have them attack us, and I tell them where to attack us so that I can show people how easy it is to actually be attacked. So that has been very, very successful because there's nothing like, you can talk all you want, but until you're actually sitting in a room and somebody's in your system, they're in your network, you don't believe that that can happen. So that was another thing I used. And then finally, we've really, my thing is, I will not tolerate anymore any person, whether the CEO or the executive vice president, saying, oh, I don't understand how to do that. I'm not a computer expert. My thing is, you better start figuring it out. Because if you need to understand how computers are networked, how they work, and if you're out in the field, especially in the IPOT environment, the operations people have to be able to accommodate. They have to really understand how the cyber works, because they could be letting companies into our sites who actually have employed people that are just trying to get in to steal stuff. So there's a lot of work that's being done there, and the work you're doing as a cyber expert is critically important for Canada and for North America. So keep doing it.
Hey, we still have a few minutes left, and I think this is a consequence of the environment that has historically been there, but I would love to hear about, I think you've shown us a really great example of how you have managed to succeed. We don't want you to be a unicorn. We want to see, all of these spaces reflective of our population. So, maybe you could comment on some of the things that you've done or that you've seen that have been successful to help raise up underrepresented groups in things like oil and gas and pipelines and construction sites that can feel inhospitable, that are, not on the surface welcoming.
Yeah, I think if you look around society today, there's no perfect place to go hide and work, and you can't make your family perfect. You can't make your extended family perfect. You can't have a perfect experience at a grocery store, at a gas station, on a vacation, in an airline. Like it's tough, right? And so I think for all people, represented and represented, and I include my grandsons in this. It takes a lot of courage to be the change you want to see, right? And so, and in order to have that courage, it takes a lot of curiosity and a lot of learning. And so, I guess what I would encourage all women and all people on this call, and our sons and our grandsons and our husbands to do, is to have the courage to continue to learn and be curious, and especially be curious about leadership, because I think we think leaders are some sort of special group. Leaders are born. I'm going, no, they're not. Definitely, they're not. Leadership is about understanding yourself and actually knowing that when you feel bad, when somebody does something to you, that's how you make people feel. As my daughter said to me, Mom's not what you say to people, it's how you make them feel, right? And so I think, I don't think anybody who tells me that they're just not going to enter into it, I'm just like, well, move aside then. You don't have the courage. You don't have the courage to get in the arena, get some dirt in your face. You're going to get hurt. You're not always going to have great days. You're going to hurt people. You have to know when, and you got to apologize. But you have to be willing to fight for the country, fight for your family, fight for the society you want. And sure, you're going to get your feelings hurt, and you're going to hurt feelings, but you have to fight, and you have to do it in good conscience. And so for me, there's no such thing as a unicorn. I don't believe in that. In fact, I think there are no such things as unicorns. But I do think we can all have more courage in how we approach each other and how we work with one another. And we can have more empathy about who that other person is. And there are no bad and good people. There are just people that wear their masks. You know, I'm listening to an old Carl Jung book that he is narrated, and it's probably written in the 30s. And there he's reminding us of the mask that we wear in society, and then who we really are, who is our real authentic self. And I think you have to keep taking your mask off, being your authentic self, and knowing that the person sitting in front of you is also authentic. It's just not you, right? And that's, I think, what leaders do. But boy, it takes courage to push through and make the society better. And we all have to get in there and do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to do our part. So at McMaster, our first year classes in engineering is 46% women. So that's a lot of courageous women who are stepping up.
Absolutely.
And I think they're there because they're starting to see how their technical contributions can do good for the world around them. And I think that was really how we started our conversation is, you know, these things that you're doing make a difference to people.
Yeah. And I think the thing is that what I would encourage you to tell them is they can't cut out, you know, they can't say, oh, it got too hard. I didn't like the place. People were mean to me. I didn't feel good. You know, they can't cut out. They have to stay in there. And frankly, when I would get absolutely fried and tired, and I'd be sitting in
And we all do.
sitting in a Dairy Queen at 10 o'clock at night, feeding my 10-year-old and my 9-year-old French fries because I couldn't even think about cooking one more meal. It was my father who said to me, oh, come on, you can figure it out. There must be another way for you to have, because he knew I came from a very, very strong family. Family was always the most important. Marriage has always been my most important thing. He knew that that was important to me. But it was him who said, oh, for God's sake, you know, quit whining, figure it out. What are you going to do differently? And so then I tried different things. And my daughters are 36 and 37 now. Jessie just had a great career at Enbridge for 10 years, and she's gone back to law school this week. Kara runs a construction business with her husband. She has 4 kids. They did walk backwards a few times because their mother wouldn't make their lunches, and you know, wouldn't answer the phone when they were calling to find out where their jeans were. But they are substantial women today because I hung in there. So hang in there and do it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, resilient. I actually think the next generation who went to school through COVID and had to, you know, manage all of those things are going to be incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
They'll see change and they'll know how to manage it. But I think you also spoke to how important it is to have supportive people around you. If you have family that can be those supportive people, or find friends or colleagues that can be that family to you, because there will always be tough times, no matter who you are.
Yeah, and we've learned that in our family. We're community builders and family builders. So we just attach people to the family, and we are a little bit, we have quite a mania about the thing that started this, the phones. I just say to the kids, okay, who's in our conversation? Can you put them on speed dial so we can get them into what we're all talking about? And it's like, ugh, our Nana's crazy, you know. But as a result, my grandchildren can have conversations, can sit at the table, can play cards. So there's a bunch of, you know, we don't have to give up everything. We are going into a different place, but it's very hard to relate to people when nobody's paying attention, right? That's not a relationship. So I love your video. Excellent.
Awesome. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm also attentive to the time, so I think I need to pass it back. So thank you so much, Dawn. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you a little bit more. Thank you again for sharing some really great insights.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm so sorry I have to interrupt the conversation, but time being what it is, this was absolutely fascinating. And we've learned a lot about what's happened with TransCanada and Trans Mountain, sorry. And of course, through a remarkable woman. how she has become now the chair. And my apologies, Dawn, that we didn't update you to the chair of Trans Mountain. But I would like us all to raise a cup of tea or water or a mug to say thank you very much to Dawn for not only doing what she has done, but sharing with others too, and providing us with such encouragement to, as she said, to be our authentic selves and to realize the potential within us. So if we could raise our mug, our glass in tribute to Dawn, that'd be wonderful. And look at Kim's mug, Little Miss Women in Engineer. Ray, Dawn, thank you, thank you, thank you. You've already achieved so much, but I have to say, in listening to you talk, I hope you're going to be writing a book, Dawn. You're not planning on just taking time off to really relax, are you? Because you no, Dawn, no. This is so good, but I'm so thrilled we've archived you, and this will go out to different engineering schools, to different women's groups. Your words will carry on far beyond today. So again, thank you very, very, very much. And the Famous Five thanks you very much for your generous donation in financial terms, as well as today too. And we had the perfect host to talk with Dawn today, didn't we? An inspiring educator who also takes time to mentor and to think about the bigger issues as it pertains to the lives of women in leadership and in engineering. So again, a toast of gratitude to Kim. Kim, you conducted the interview brilliantly, and so we thank you very much to Kim. And to all your students, how lucky they are. And our last toast, of course, goes to our two young women leaders, to DeAndre and to Shailene, for their leadership, and in hopes that they will continue. They added much to today. Thank you very much. And today we had people from all across Canada. And I'm just going to take a moment now to do some Famous Five news, and I invite Dawn and Kim to just to relax for a moment and then to come back shortly. So as you know, this is the 95th anniversary of the Persons case. On October 18th, it will be a celebration of the first legal declaration of the principle of equality. 5 women from Canada achieved this. And we're inviting all of you to come to Olympic Plaza to participate in a public celebration. Unfortunately, it'll probably be the last time we can gather around the Women Are Persons monument, because shortly thereafter it will be moved. But do join us that day to learn a little more about our history and to figure out how you too can be a nation builder, just like Dawn is, just like Kim is. Following the public open to everybody event, which will have school classes there and also other performers, we are gathering at the Fairmont Pallisers Crystal Ballroom for the pink tea. It's only one place where they were all together, but I'm glad to tell you, I'm sorry to tell you, we're sort of sold out, but we've started a waiting list because we have people who have said, I want to come, but now I may have to be out of town. So please go to our website and register on our waiting list to come to the pink tea. It'll be fantastic. You'll meet also people who have won the Governor General's Award in commemoration of the Persons case. These are outstanding women who across Canada have worked for a number of years to improve, and they have improved substantially, the lives of women and girls in Canada. So that's our pink tea, but most of us will not be able to come to a pink tea, but we want you to host your own. Bring 2, 3, 4 friends together and host your own pink tea. Express gratitude for being a Canadian woman. We're one of the luckiest women in the world. We're Canadian women. So bring together some friends. We have some kits ready for you, both in French and English, that can give you some tips along the way. And please register on our website that you are holding a pink tea. We know that one of the pink teas is going to be a breakfast pink tea. And this is because of Joanne Legg in Ottawa, who's with the Defense Women's Advisory Council. And the topic for their discussion is going to be menopause. How does menopause frustrate women's ambition as leaders? We also know that members, different chapters of the International Women's Forum of Canada are also going to have pink teas. And we're very grateful that this will happen in Ottawa, in Montreal, and in Edmonton. And our thanks also to Susan Green in Edmonton, who has is going to be contacting her Rotary Club, which was the first all-women's Rotary Club in North America. And she's going to organize a pink tea with them. So please get your friends together, get your community together, and say thank you to the women who have built Canada. Talk about how you can improve Canada, and then take your pledge to build a better Canada. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is what's going to happen in Ottawa. So our chapter in Ottawa is celebrating the Famous Five just a week later on Sunday, October the 27th. And this is open to everybody to come to the Museum of Nature and learn who are the five trailblazers, the five women who are following in the footsteps of the Famous Five, but down their own path. It'll be a fascinating afternoon, and an afternoon of inspiration. So please think about, if you're in the Ottawa area, the Outaouais area, please think about attending on Sunday, October the 27th. Next slide, please. October 18th is Persons Day. So we would like every city, town, village, county to declare October 18th as Persons Day. We've approached a number of the major settlements of Canada, the cities, to do this, but we haven't done everybody's. So would you please contact your mayor, your city councillor, to declare October 18th as Person Days? Hopefully they can do that, so this will happen this year and it will happen every year thereafter. We're also talking to various provincial governments. Some have already declared October 18th as Persons Day, as has the federal government, but we want the other provinces to make it aware that there is this important principle of equality, and that this is something that women have done to improve the quality of life in Canada for all kinds of people. Next, please. Special thanks to those of you in the Calgary region and elsewhere who have contacted us about the movement of the Women Are Persons Monument in Calgary. We still don't quite know where it's going to go, but it's very important that, as per the next slide, if you are still interested in helping us with this, that you contact the City of Calgary councillors and mayor and say, these women represent a very important democratic achievement for Canada. Yes, they were women of their time and therefore didn't say or believe some of the things that we do today, but that is our history, and it's up to us to fill out that history, both in terms of more information about what was happening at that time or not happening, which is probably more important, but also to think about how we go forward from here. So please continue to think about how you and the Famous Five can make Canada a better country. And to help you do so, there are 5 amazing books that have just been issued. Oh, I wish I didn't have to sleep. I'm going to read all of these, but it may take me a couple of months to do so. But they're all absolutely terrific books. And I want to particularly bring your attention to the book by the first on the list by the Right Honorable Kim Campbell, Canada's first and only Prime Minister. But she was Prime Minister approximately 30 years ago. Canada had her first political leader. And just a little personal note, here's hoping the United States catches up. So as we complete this major 95th anniversary, we're starting to look at where we go. Next slide, please. So our last virtual Pink Tea will be on November the 15th, and it will feature a panel of female veterans. We're very pleased that we've just had confirmation that Senator Rebecca Patterson will be on the panel. She is the first female member of the Canadian Armed Forces to become a senator. Joining her will be a remarkable female veteran from Winnipeg, an Indigenous leader by the name of Randy Sue. So we'll have more information for you as we get close to November 15th. But then we want to start thinking about what do we do for 2025 and beyond. So 2029 will be the 100th anniversary of the Person's Case. What should we have achieved between then and now? Please send us your ideas so that we can build on the increased awareness of the role that women have played, on the opportunities for women to play a bigger role. And like Dawn said, encourage all of us to put our shoulders back, take a deep breath and say, I'm a leader too, and apply for that job or accept that responsibility. Next slide, please, says thank you very much. And I'm going to invite both Dawn and Kim to come back for the final part of our virtual Pink Tea. And that is for each of us to put our shoulders back, to take a deep breath, and to prepare ourselves to be a leader too. Because even if you don't have the title or you don't think of yourself that way, you are a leader to somebody or lots of other people. So we would like you to say in a strong, clear voice, to me, I'm a leader too. So I'm going to count down from 5 and ask you shoulders back, deep breath, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. To me,
I'm a leader too.
I'm a leader too. Dawn, would you like to say it, please? Because you are a leader.
I'm a leader too.
Yes, and a nation builder. Kim?
I'm a leader too.
You certainly are, preparing many more nation builders. So thank you too very much, and to everybody who joined us today and the others who will see this program as we distribute it. You are all leaders. Have a super 95th anniversary on October 18th. Have a Pink Tea, and we'll see you on November the 15th. Take care. Merci, miigwech. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have you ever had a conversation with someone and felt like they weren't listening? Like maybe they didn't even care about what you had to say? Not so long ago, life was a bit like that for women in Canada. They weren't allowed to vote. And if they spoke out and voiced their opinions, they could even be sent to jail. It was a time when women had more fear and less freedom, more rules and fewer rights. But 5 courageous Albertan women came together and changed it all. How, you might ask? Over a cup of tea. That's right, a cup of tea. But more on that in a minute. Almost 100 years ago, Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Nellie McClung, Louise McKinney, and Henrietta Muir Edwards were fed up with the way things were. Emily Murphy was the first female magistrate in Canada and wanted to be appointed to the Senate. But since she was a woman, she wasn't eligible. The law at the time said it was a position for persons, a word which somehow didn't include women. The women who would become known as the Famous 5 set out to change that. But since women were strongly discouraged from getting together and talking about politics, the Famous 5 set up what they called Pink Teas. The name was a great disguise. People assumed that they were just having dainty tea parties, but in reality, they were planning their strategy to move forward gender equality in Canada. All the planning and work that occurred during the Pink Teas led to the Famous 5's first petition to the Supreme Court of Canada. It was not to be that easy. Their petition was rejected. But they weren't giving up. They decided to approach the highest possible court authority at the time, the Privy Council of England. And on October 18th, 1929, an amazing thing happened. The Famous 5's petition led to the ruling that women were included as persons under law. These 5 courageous women changed the course of history in Canada and the Commonwealth and paved the way for women to be considered equal in all aspects of life. Generations later, their actions continue to inspire Canadian women to be ambitious, adventurous, and famous. Today, the Famous 5 Foundation works to create a society where every voice is heard, valued, and has the power to challenge and conquer injustice.